The debt was $40. This is important to establish because $40 in Harlan, Colorado in 1881 was not an insignificant amount. It was a month's wages for a skilled laborer, or the cost of outfitting a small homestead kitchen, or the price of a good saddle. My father had owed it to Dr. Thomas Ashford since the winter of 1879, when the fever had taken 6 weeks of his life, and Thomas had come to his bedside 3 times a week and had charged him what he thought my father could pay, which at the time was nothing, and had written the rest in a ledger as a debt to be collected later. Later had come in the wrong form. My father died in September of 1881, 2 weeks after I received his letter telling me the cough was worse, leaving me insufficient time to reach Harlan from Denver by stage before he was in the ground. He left a house in need of repair, a modest account at the Harlan Savings and Trust, and a list of obligations written in his careful hand on the inside cover of his Bible. The $40 to the doctor was at the top. I came to Harlan in October to settle his affairs, which is what you do when you are a bookkeeper and your father dies leaving unresolved accounts. You settle them. The alternative, leaving accounts open, is not something I am constitutionally able to do. I have kept books since I was 16 years old, first for my uncle's dry goods business in Columbus, and then for 3 Denver firms, and in 15 years I had never left a column that didn't balance. My father's Bible was a ledger. I intended to clear it. Harlan was a town of perhaps 300 people that had grown up around a silver claim that had proved modest but persistent. It had the particular character of mining towns that are not booming, not desperate, not abandoned, just settled into the long work of being a place where people lived and made do. The main street had a hotel, 2 saloons, a general store, a barber shop, the telegraph office, and the doctor's surgery. The hotel was better than I expected, which was a relief, because I had not packed for a long stay and found myself staying anyway. I had been in Harlan for 2 days before I went to see the doctor. The first day I settled the immediate accounts, the house, which I sold to a young miner and his wife for the asking price because I had not come to negotiate, only to close. And the second day I went through my father's papers and assembled the list of obligations. $40 to the doctor, $12 to the general store, $8 to a man named Calhoun, who my father described only as a debt of honor and who I could not locate in 2 days of asking. The store and the honor debt I settled on day 2. The doctor I saved for last, not because I was nervous. I am not a nervous person by nature, but because $40 required a banknote and I wanted to present it properly. Dr. Ashford's office was on the main street of Harlan, between the telegraph office and the hardware store, in a building that had been built to be something else and converted through the application of a painted sign on the door. I went on a Wednesday morning before the afternoon stage that would take me back to Denver, with the $40 in an envelope in my satchel and the entry from my father's Bible copied onto a piece of paper so I could present the debt clearly. He came out of the back room when the bell rang. He was not what I had expected. I do not know exactly what I had expected. A country doctor in a Colorado mining town in 1881. A man who treats miners with broken things and makes house calls on horses. But whatever I had expected, Thomas Ashford was somewhat to one side of it. He was lean and slightly distracted looking, with wire-rimmed spectacles that sat slightly crooked and that he straightened immediately upon seeing me and then forgot about again. And he had the hands of a man who worked precisely, which was one of the first things I noticed, because hands tell you a great deal about how a person approaches their work. I told him who I was. I gave him the copied entry. I produced the envelope. I explained, clearly and without unnecessary elaboration, that I was settling my father's outstanding obligations before returning to Denver, and that the amount in the envelope represented the full $40 with no deduction. He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. He said, "I appreciate you coming in, Miss Caswell. I won't be taking that." I said, "I beg your pardon." He said, "Your father's account was settled." I should have made a note in the ledger. I'll do that now. He said this with the pleasant finality of a man who considers the matter concluded and is ready for the next item. I was not ready for the next item. I said, "The ledger says $40 outstanding." My father's record agrees. "I have $40 in this envelope," he said. "Your father sat with 3 men during the '79 flood when I couldn't reach them. He kept them comfortable through the night until the water dropped. 2 of those men had wives and children. I don't put that in the ledger, but I carry it." He paused. I'd say we're more than even. He was very certain about this. I was certain about other things. I said, with respect, "The service you rendered and any service my father may have provided are separate accounts. You cannot simply declare them settled against each other without the agreement of both parties." He looked at me over his spectacles. He said, "Your father agreed. We shook on it in 1880." I said, "My father is dead and cannot confirm that." He said, "No, he can't." A silence. He said, "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" I left Harlan on the afternoon stage with the envelope still in my satchel and a very precise and building irritation that I spent 4 hours on the stage organizing into something I could act on. I came back in November. The second refusal was different from the first. The first had been professional, delivered with the ease of a man who had made the same decision before and saw no reason to reconsider it. The second, when I presented the formal demand letter, had a different quality. He had read the letter carefully and set it down and looked at me with the specific expression of someone who is both amused and impressed, which I found irritating in the way you find irritating the things you also find slightly gratifying. He said, "You drafted this yourself." I said, "I am a bookkeeper. I understand documents." He said, "Yes, I can see that." He paused. "It is a well-constructed letter." I said, "Thank you." "It is also a legally valid demand." He said, "It is." He turned it over in his hands. "And if I were inclined to take the $40, which I am not, I would have no valid counterargument." I said, "Then take it." He said, "The thing about valid arguments is that they address the stated question. This," he tapped the letter, "addresses whether I am legally required to accept payment. It doesn't address whether I'm going to." I looked at him. He looked back at me. He had, I noticed for the first time in this visit, a small scar along his jaw that I had not noticed in October. And he held the letter with the care of someone who respected documents even when he was declining to be bound by them. In the weeks between, I thought about the refusal more than I thought about anything else I was working on. which was a significant amount of thinking since I was at the time preparing the quarterly accounts for 2 Denver firms and auditing the books of a third. I am not someone whose thoughts wander from the work in front of her. But Thomas Ashford's refusal had the quality of an arithmetic error, something that looked wrong, that my instincts insisted was wrong, but that I could not make right by applying the usual methods. I should say something about why I am a bookkeeper. It is not a common profession for a woman in 1881. Though it is not as uncommon as people assume, Western Union alone employed several women in bookkeeping positions in Denver when I arrived, and the railroads had been using women for accounts work since the 60s. But the reason I am a bookkeeper is not strategic. I am a bookkeeper because numbers make sense to me in a way that many other things do not. They are honest. A column either balances or it doesn't, and when it doesn't, there is a reason. And finding that reason is satisfying in a way I have never been able to adequately explain to people who prefer words to numbers. Debt that cannot be settled is not an arithmetic problem. It is a different kind of problem, the kind that has human beings in it rather than figures. And human beings are considerably less tractable than figures. I was aware of this. I was also aware that I had $40 in an envelope and a legal and moral obligation to deliver it, and that the doctor's assessment of what constituted settlement did not override my own assessment. I had spent 3 weeks researching the legal framework for debt collection in Colorado Territory, which is not the most gripping 3 weeks of my professional life, but which I had approached with the same thoroughness I gave everything. I came with a properly drafted demand letter, which I had written myself because I was a bookkeeper and understood documents and saw no reason to pay a lawyer $40 to write a letter when the debt itself was $40. Thomas received the letter in the same spirit he received most things, which was with attention and no visible agitation. He read it. He folded it carefully and set it on his desk. He said, "You've gone to a great deal of trouble for $40. I said, "It has nothing to do with $40. He said, "No, I know." He paused. "What does it have to do with?" I had a very good answer to this prepared. I had prepared it on the stage from Denver, and I had refined it during the 2-hour wait in the relay station at the county seat. And it was a thorough and accurate answer about professional obligation and the proper keeping of accounts. What came out of my mouth was, "I don't leave things unresolved." He considered this. He said, "I see." He said, "I have coffee on the back stove. It's better than what the hotel serves," which I realize is not high praise in Harlan. I stayed for 40 minutes. We talked about Denver and about the railroad and about what had happened to the price of silver since the previous year. And at no point did I successfully redirect the conversation back to the $40. When I left, he said he hoped I'd come back to see him. Not specifically about the debt, just in general. As if that were a normal thing to say to a woman who had traveled 100 miles twice to hand him money he refused to take. I went back to Denver. I thought about what he had said. I thought about it more than the situation warranted. The third visit was in December. I had not intended to come back a third time. I had decided on the stage back from the November visit that I had made a reasonable effort and that the doctor's refusal was an eccentricity I could not professionally be held responsible for, and that I would simply note in my records that the Debt was disputed, and leave it at that. I came back anyway. I told myself it was on my way to the county seat for another matter, which was not technically a lie in the sense that the county seat was in the same general direction as Harlan. If you were willing to add 35 miles to the journey, which I was apparently willing to do. He was with a patient when I arrived. I sat in the waiting room, which was 4 chairs and a side table with a year-old copy of Harper's Monthly. And I read the Harper's Monthly, and I thought about why I was sitting in this particular chair in this particular waiting room in Harlan, Colorado in December, and I did not arrive at any conclusions I was willing to commit to. When he came out, he saw me and he did something I had not yet seen him do, which was smile. Not the polite professional expression he had worn in our previous encounters. An actual smile, brief and unperformed, arriving before he could arrange his face into something more neutral. He said, "Miss Caswell." "I didn't know you were coming," I said. "I hadn't decided until I was already on the stage," he said. "That sounds like a decision that wasn't made in the usual way," I said. "I make my decisions methodically and in advance." "This was an exception," he said. "I see." We had coffee again. He had a small sitting room behind the office where he took meals and read, bookshelves on 2 walls, a desk with a lamp. The particular comfortable disorder of a room that has been arranged by one person and not rearranged since. He had moved to Harlan from a practice in Cincinnati 6 years ago. He told me that afternoon after his wife died. He said it without particular weight, the way a person mentions a fact they have integrated so completely it has stopped being a wound and become simply a part of the shape of things. I recognize this because I have my own version of it. My mother, Columbus. The move to Denver, and people who have done this particular work tend to recognize it in each other. The way you recognize a scar that has healed the same way. He did not elaborate, and I did not ask, because the conversation had a quality of exchange to it, a balance of what was offered and what was received, and pressing for more would have tipped it. He asked about my work. I explained bookkeeping, which I had explained 100 times to people who thought it was a strange occupation and who I had ceased to be bothered by. He did not think it was a strange occupation. He said it was interesting to spend your professional life in the logic of exchange. What was owed? What was paid? What balanced? I said it was considerably more satisfying than most professions because the answer was objectively determinable. He said he envied me that. Medicine, he said, had very few questions with objectively determinable answers. I said that sounded exhausting. He said it was, occasionally, and also occasionally the opposite. He moved to Harlan from a practice in Cincinnati 6 years ago. He told me that afternoon after his wife died. He did not elaborate on this, and I did not ask. He said Harlan needed a doctor and that it had seemed like a place where he could make himself useful, which he said was what he had needed at the time. I understood this. In the specific way you understand something when it maps onto your own experience, the need to be useful in a new place. In a place that isn't full of the shape of what you used to have. My mother had died when I was 23. I had been keeping books in Columbus at the time, and I had moved to Denver 6 months later. Partly because Denver needed bookkeepers and partly because Columbus had too many rooms. I knew by the shape of the absence in them. I said none of this. I said, "The debt is still in your ledger." He said, "Yes," I said. I came to ask you to close it." He looked at the lamp between us on the small table. He said, "I know. I've been thinking about why you keep coming back when you could simply write it off in your own books and be done with it." I said, "Because it doesn't work that way." He said, "What way?" I said, "You can't close an account in your own ledger that the other party hasn't agreed to close." He said, "That's a very precise way of putting a very imprecise thing." We looked at each other. The lamp between us was the same one he read by in the evenings. I could tell from the slight smoky darkening of the glass. And the room was warm, and the December cold was hard on the other side of the window, and I had 100 miles of stage between me and Denver, he said. Nora, he had not used my given name before, he said. The debt will be in the ledger as long as there is a ledger. That is not something I'm willing to change. I said, why not? He said, because the day it's settled is the day there's no reason for you to come back. And I would like you to have a reason to come back. The lamp moved in a draft from the window. I sat with this for a long time. It was, in terms of the thing I had come to do, a failure. The debt was not closed. The account was not settled. By every professional standard I applied to these situations, I had made 3 trips to Harlan and accomplished nothing. But Thomas Ashford had said, I would like you to have a reason to come back. I went back to Denver. I sat at my desk with my own ledger open in front of me, and I looked at the entry, George Caswell, debt to Dr. Thomas Ashford, Harlan, $40, outstanding. I left it outstanding. The decision to come back in March. Without the envelope was made the same way the decision to come the 3rd time had been made, the night before. After I had been sitting at my desk for an hour with the ledger open in front of me and had finally admitted to myself what the open entry actually meant. It meant I was not done. This was not an accounting observation. It was the other kind of not done. The kind that has nothing to do with $40 and everything to do with the sitting room with books on the walls and a lamp between 2 chairs, and a man who said, I would like you to have a reason to come back. I had not. In the 13 years since my mother died, and I had started working for my uncle and then moved to Denver and built the precise and self-sufficient life I had built, allowed myself very many things that were not related to work or to the careful management of what I could control. I was not unhappy. I want to be clear about that, because I have no patience for retrospective narratives in which the woman spent years miserable and alone until the right man appeared. I was not miserable. I was competent and self-sufficient, and occasionally, in the evenings, aware of the particular silence of rooms that have been arranged for one person. Thomas Ashford's sitting room was arranged for one person, and yet had not felt like that. I had thought about this more than was entirely proportionate. I came back to Harlan in March, on a day when the last of the winter was lifting off the mountains, and the high country light had that particular quality of Colorado, spring that makes everything look simultaneously real and impossible. The journey was the same 11 hours but felt shorter, which I understood as information about what I was going toward rather than information about the road. I came without the envelope. I had made this decision the night before, and I had not thought about it further, because thinking about it further would have been an obstacle. Thomas was at his desk when I came in. He looked up. He looked at my satchel. He looked at my hands. He said nothing. I said, "I'm not here about the debt." He said, "I know." He said it quietly. He said, "I've been hoping you'd say that." Sat down across from him and we had coffee and we talked until the afternoon stage left without me. And I stayed in Harlan that night at the hotel and took the morning stage to Denver. And the following month he came to Denver on the matter of a medical conference, and we had dinner at the restaurant on Larimer Street, and he was the same in Denver as he was in Harlan, which is a thing I had wondered about. He was the same. He took his spectacles on and off without noticing he was doing it, and he asked questions and actually waited for the answers, and he had. I discovered over dinner opinions about books and about the territorial rail policy and about the proper temperature at which to serve coffee, which was hotter than most restaurants managed, which was a professional opinion he held with quiet conviction.